Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started with our family name sign. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just take your sandpaper and you're going to want to sand all of your frame pieces and your flat piece. So you can see I already painted this one, so I already sanded it because I wanted to skip that step so you didn't have to watch it dry. But I'll flip it over just to kind of show you what I did. So the front shouldn't need to be sanded unless you just have any kind of imperfection. But along the edges, you just want to go back and forth and get all those splinters gone. Okay, so do that on your big one. And your frame pieces, they'll take some good sanding. Okay, so these are pretty rustic pieces. So you'll just want to keep going in the direction of the wood grain and just go back and forth. I like to make little sanding movements. You'll want to just even out as much as you can on these frame pieces. You'll see as we go to assemble it later that you actually will only be able to see one of the skinny sides and one of the wider sides. So even if you have some kind of imperfection on your wood, on one side it's okay because it'll probably be hidden or on the back. So just look for kind of like your favorite edge and your favorite side. So we'll stain all of it and you can kind of choose later before we frame it, okay? So make sure you get all of the edges and everything like that, all on your frame pieces. Let's set those aside. Now, we're gonna go ahead and work on the main board. And like I said, I already started the black so that you wouldn't have to wait for it to dry. But your first step would be to paint this with a layer of black. So I'll kind of just give you a demonstration since I did the other side. You don't have to be too cautious with this paint. You can use pretty much as you want. But I'm gonna just spread it out. And when I first start, it's important that you do a pretty thin coat. And the reason being is you can always add more paint, but we can't really take it away if you put too much texture on there, okay? So stay always with the wood grain. So we're gonna go up and down and then put on a thin coat on the whole thing. So just like I started right here. This was a pretty thin coat. I could still see kind of the wood grain through it. And then I'll let that dry. It should only take a couple minutes, especially if you did it really thin, and then I'm gonna do it again, okay? So I want this to be a pretty solid black. So I'll show you kind of, this is my finished product. I got it a little bit dusty when I was sanding. So this is my finished product here, okay? So I want to just have a black board. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a tape measure or a ruler and I'm gonna mark, if you'll notice on your stencil, so on the stencil, there's a circle on the top and there's a circle on the bottom, and that is to help you center your sign on the board and get it as straight as possible, because sometimes it drives me nuts if I can't get these things perfectly straight, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure. So yours might be a little bit different, so make sure you measure yours, but they should be very close to 12 inches across, okay? So I'm gonna use a pencil, and I'm gonna mark right at 6 inches. Now a pencil is great for this because we can just erase it and you won't be able to see it in the end, okay? So let me just do a little mark at 6 on the top and the bottom, and then like I said, I can use those circles and line up as close as I can to the center for the stencil. All right, so now I'm gonna take my stencil, and I'm gonna use my scraper and I'm gonna scrape all over it. So this should come off pretty easily, but we're looking to get this clear paper. This is called transfer tape. We wanted to transfer this stencil onto my board. Okay, so once I've scraped it, I'm gonna start peeling. Again, I'm separating this clear part and I'm trying to pick up the whole stencil. So I just wanna make sure all those letters come off so that I end up with just a blank blue board, or paper, I guess. So I'll set that aside, and I've got my whole stencil right here, okay? Now, this is not gonna stick until you really press it down to stick. So you're gonna be able to float it just a little bit to get it as straight as possible. So let me stand up. I like to be kind of over my sign to see. And then, like I said, I'm gonna use those little gray marks that I made with my pencil, and I'm gonna try to center those as best I can on my little circles and my gray marks, okay? So now I have that. Now I still haven't pushed it. I'm trying to make myself a little bit more space because I want to be able to like look down on it and say, okay, this looks really straight. This looks good, okay? So I can see that through there. And then once I've decided, when I made my commitment that this is where it's gonna go, I can start it with just my hands. I like to press it down with my hands, just so you don't get anything like shifting when you start scraping, okay? And then I'm gonna scrape down with my scraper again. So this one scrape down real good, just back and forth. I kind of make long swipes across here. All right, so once we got that on there, let's see how it sticks. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's not, so let's see. I like to peel it at a diagonal. I've always found that to be the best strategy. All right, so it looks like it's coming off just fine. So my goal was to leave all of that white stencil behind, okay? So now I don't need this anymore. I can set that to the side. Now my next step is I'm gonna use my black sponge again. And this time I'm going to seal my stencil. So I don't need a ton of paint. It should either be just where you already had it damp. I barely put any paint on mine, so I added a little bit more. And I'm gonna go back, actually, you know what? Pause. I can see some of my pencil mark. I'm gonna go ahead and erase that real quick. I don't wanna seal that in there. You erase those pencil marks real quick. All right. Ask me how I know not to use Sharpie, because I've done that before, and 6 layers of paint later, it was still showing through, so never do that. Please use a pencil. All right, here we go. Now I'm just gonna take this, pause one more time, sorry. We don't need those dots on there. I'm being such a blondie today, I'm so sorry. Hold on. Let me get these dots off of there, they're sticking really good. Okay, these little dots that you use to put the stencil on there, we don't need those to be part of our sign. So let's take those off. All right, let me try again. Now it is time to seal the stencil. Okay, so I've got and all I'm doing is just putting wet paint all over where the stencil is. And so what that's doing is, hopefully, if I get any leakage of my white paint, if I get any leakage at all under this stencil, it's gonna leak in that black paint and I won't get any leakage from my white paint. Not that it's impossible, you could still possibly get some leakage, but this should eliminate 99% of that leakage, okay? Now I'm just being real gentle when I'm putting this on here, just because obviously I don't want to tear up these stencils. We've got some skinny letters and stuff on this project. So I'm just being real gentle with my black. Okay, so you don't have to cover the whole sign because you already did a really solid coat on the black. This is just to seal the stencil, and it should be thin enough that you can see right through it, and I can still see that vinyl letter and name and stuff, okay? So let me show you that now that I finally got my head on straight. All right, so there's that so far. So like I said, I just put the black paint over the letter and the stencil. All right, so then I'm gonna hop back over to my, my frame piece, okay? So I finished sanding, I went all this direction, okay, wipe that off. And then you should have your container of stain and a stain sponge, any sponge. Your stain needs to be shaken before you use it, so just make sure, just leave the lid on and just shake it really good. All right, let me pop this off. Now, you can kind of get a couple different colors just depending on what you're looking for. I really like seeing the wood grain on the frame. And so I'm gonna stretch out my stain as far as I can. So what I'm gonna do is I start with my ends. So you have to do all the ends of your pieces, and I kind of dab on there because it just sucks that stain right up. So let me do these ends, okay? And then on the actual frame piece, I'm just gonna, like I said, stretch out that stain as far as it'll go so I can see that wood grain through it, okay? I'm just gonna work my way around. So this is not that much stain that I'm using, and it's soaked up really good into the sponge, so you just keep spreading it, and it should just go on there and give you some really pretty wood grain like that. Really like that for this sign. All right, so again, just kind of squeezing my sponge. If you need more, you're more than welcome to. And if you want a more solid color or a darker color, then just do another coat or put it on thicker, let it soak, however you want to do, okay? So we're gonna set that aside and let it dry. All of this is washable, so you can go wash your hands with soap, it should come off. It's all just water-based. All right, so while that is still drying, I'm gonna show you a little bit about doing the nailing on the frame, okay? So I like to do what's called pre-nailing. And what that means is I'm gonna go ahead and hammer some of the nails before I hold the frame up to the side of the sign, okay? So for example, I know that the way I'm gonna frame the sign is gonna be flush with the front lip of the frame piece, okay? So if I kind of imagine that, if I imagine the frame, the sign, and then this frame is going to be flush with this front, you can kind of get the idea that the nail does not need to be too far down, okay? So for example, if I'm going to put nails down here, I need to go just about like maybe like 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, okay? So this piece is a tiny bit bowed. So I think for most people, you would be good on these long pieces with just 2 nails on here. But because mine is a little bit bowed, I'm gonna probably go ahead and do 3 on here just to make sure I hold it on there. So I'll show you the 2 first. Grab a few of these. So what I do is I'm just gonna hold it, like I said, like maybe at the 1/3 mark, and then for me, I'm gonna do one in the middle. You don't have to, but you can. I put some extra nails in there in case. And then I'm gonna do it about 1/4 of an inch from the side, and go ahead and start hammering this in. So pretty much I'm trying to hammer it in as far as it'll go without coming through, okay? So let me do, okay, so I did that. Oh, mine even started coming through a tiny bit. I'll knock that out. Okay, but just so you can kind of see how far it is from the edge. So it's definitely on closer to this side, okay, to that edge, since I'm gonna be putting it close. Then I'll put one on this end. Okay, and then like I said, I'm gonna add one in the middle. You don't have to. Mine just happens to be a tiny bit bowed, so I wanna pull that real tight on here. Let me add a 3rd one. So I'm just gonna make sure I hold it as straight as possible. Okay, so I did that because then whenever I go to put this frame piece on there, it's just a ton easier to get it to stay into place if I've already nailed these part of the way, versus like trying to balance the sign and getting the nails in and all of that stuff. Okay, for these smaller pieces, they are actually going to overlap the big pieces like this, okay? So you're gonna wanna have one on the end that's gonna go into this frame piece. You're gonna wanna have one in the middle that goes into the sign itself, and you're gonna have to have one on this end that goes into the frame piece, okay? So I'm just gonna make a decision, which edge do I like best? If you have a broken spot or whatever and you don't want that to be visible, then just pick the side. Okay, so I want this side to be the top or whatever, then that way you know that the edge that you're gonna nail closer to, that's the one that's gonna be showing on the front of your sign whenever it's done. Okay, so make a decision. I like all of it. Okay, so I'm gonna put one on each end, but this one, the ones on the end are in the middle. This is for the small pieces, right? So for the small pieces, the one on the end is in the middle, and I'll show you. Whoop. So I bent it. That's a great thing. I always like it when I mess up because then I can show you what I would do if that really happened. So I'm gonna go ahead, these are a little bit harder to pop out with your hammer because they're nailed brads, they don't have a head on them. But I went ahead and I pulled this one out and I bent it, so it's ruined. Do not try to reuse that, okay? So I'm gonna go back and try again. All right, so get that one in. Now I'm gonna go on this end in the middle. And then one on the edge, and like I said, it's gonna go in the middle towards the side that I'm framing. So the edge that I like, that's one that's gonna show. Okay, so get that as close as I can. Let me check on my sign, how I'm doing. I still have a couple little spots. I'm gonna rub those so I can get that. Okay. So our next step on this is we're gonna go ahead and do the white, okay? So let me get my white. Now, for this step, again, if you wanna like wipe on the sign, I think that will be okay. I just want you to be super careful around your stencils, okay? But these stencils seem to be stuck really good, so I'm not too concerned about wiping. A lot of times I'll want you just to bounce your sponge like this, and you can also get good coverage like that. It just takes longer, and so sometimes people really wanna wipe, which you can sometimes you can't because it's just too sensitive. So I'm being very careful as I'm putting this on here. So it's obvious that I'm gonna need more than one coat, but we wanna do 2 thin coats and not 1 very thick coat, okay? So I'm being very gentle. I don't wanna pull up my stencil. I'm spreading out that paint so there's not a ton of texture that's left behind or anything like that. Okay, so let me get this going. All right, and then let me get this top half. You may not recognize me because I have my glasses on. My kids have been like freaking out, wanting to understand why I'm wearing glasses, but I usually wear contacts, and I've worn contacts for the last 20 years, and I ran out. And because of everything going on with supply issues and all of that stuff, I finally got to the eye doctor yesterday, but they were like, yeah, they don't carry my prescription in stock because I'm so blind. So they always have to order even just like the sample pair. So I'm just waiting on the sample pair to get here. So once the sample pair gets here, then I can order, hopefully, some contacts. I don't mind wearing glasses so much, it's just that it makes me kind of dizzy. Like I feel like my depth perception is off, and so I really prefer to have my contacts. And I can't wear my sunglasses because I don't have prescription sunglasses, and I wear my sunglasses everywhere I go, so. All right, so I've got my first layer done. I was trying to attempt going to my second layer. It wasn't working. It wants me to let it dry. So I'm gonna have to be a little more patient, okay? So I'm gonna wait just a minute and let that dry some, and then we'll see whether we can do another layer by rubbing, or if we're gonna have to bounce it to make it thicker. So I'm gonna use my blue paper, dry this just a little bit. Okay, I think it's gonna take a little bit, so I'll pause and I'll come right back and we'll finish this sign up together. So let's let this dry and we'll do another coat, put our frame on and peel off and get going. Okay, I'll be back in just a minute.